Welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Really excited about today's guest. We've got Shri Rhagunathan from Noctrix Health, CEO and President of Noctrix Health. Shri, how you doing today?
Good to meet you, Mike. Thank you for having me on. Doing fantastic.
Great, great. And for those that are listening, where are you calling in from?
We are in sunny Pleasanton, California today. So it's
Pleasanton. All
blue
right, good
skies
deal.
and supposed to be 80 degrees.
All right, good deal, good deal. Well, we'll take that this time of year for the Bay Area. Um, really excited about the conversation today. This is a disease state and a device that's near and dear to my heart. We've talked in the past. I've been afflicted with restless leg syndrome since I was a child. I had the disease and didn't know that I had the disease. I remember being a kid and going to sleep at night and wondering what that funny sensation was in my legs, and I would get it very, very infrequently, but I would get it nonetheless. And then I think it was around 28 years old. I got it pretty significantly, and it was from that point on. It was every night. I dealt with it every night. Was bounced back and forth on medication to medication, trying to figure it out. My dad has dealt with it since he was 40 years old. He's now about 82. And it's just a disease state that has not had the attention to it that it should. So thank you for the initiative here and for creating the device that you did. Just to kind of set the stage for the market. What is it? I believe it's 1 in 10, but roughly 10% of the population has restless leg syndrome. I believe the statistics are 1 in 5 pregnant women have the experience restless leg syndromes at least periodically. 25% of diabetics experience restless leg syndrome, which, as we know, diabetes is increasing. So this is a market that's growing and probably much larger than we think it is today, just because so many people are probably going undiagnosed. So with that as kind of the backdrop of the market, I'd love for you to kind of explain what's the use case that you guys, why did you guys create the device? What made you decide to kind of jump in and make a mark here?
Thank you for that. And I think, while it's unfortunate to hear about your own personal experience with RLS, uh, you're not alone in this. It's, like you correctly mentioned, 1 in 10 adults in the US suffers from RLS. The prevalence is pretty unbelievably large. Um, of the people that are diagnosed, vast majority of them wind up being on medications because it is when you can't sleep more than 3 or 4 nights a week, you're going to go talk to your physician about, hey, how do I fix this? And solution tends to be Parkinsonian drugs, which is the mainstay of treatment. And what's particularly unique about RLS compared to a number of the disease states, and I'll talk about why we got here in a second, but compared to a number of other disease states, what I found particularly compelling in talking to the patients, the HCPs that treat RLS, and also the caregivers of the patients that suffer through it, the bed partners that have to experience RLS themselves as well. It was this massive amount of dissatisfaction with the fact that they're having to be on a Parkinsonian drug, which ironically makes RLS worse over time. And now this is widely studied and widely reported in literature. They call it augmentation.
Yep.
So much so that dopamine is being pulled from the standard of care guidelines to treat RLS. But unfortunately, that leaves very limited or no practical options for patients to get on besides one FDA-approved drug that exists to treat RLS at this point. So for me, dialing this back, it came down to this came out of an observation. I was a fellow at a program here on campus, Stanford Biodesign, and Stanford University has had this program for over coming up on 30 years now, or maybe even a little over 30 years, where they bring in engineers from industry practicing physicians from industry as well, from hospitals, put them together for a whole year, and you come up with, what is a problem worth solving? And don't worry about solving it. Just tell me why it's worth solving. Who's it a problem in? When do you know you're done? And in the nine-headed monster that is healthcare, with all the different stakeholders, that winds up being the DNA of a good company forward. It's like if you have a strong unmet need, and I always tell the team when I talk to them is, we look at all the AirPods and the iPhones and Apple Watches. Everybody wants one of those. And you line up a bunch of stents and pacemakers and tell them to pick one. And they're like, well, I don't know if I want any of these.
Right.
You need one. So, and in healthcare, I think fundamentally it's understanding that we're treating a need, not a want. And that changes the perspective around every single thing about how you go about solving that problem. Because now you're completely focused on what is truly that unmet need that we're trying to address. And the solution, the technology just becomes a means to that end. So you're not walking around with a hammer looking for a nail.
Right.
You're trying to say, well, what is a way to solve this? And, how do we solve this best? So when we were at Biodesign, I was chasing an angle originally on sleep apnea and saw a bunch of patients come into the Redwood City clinics that were getting diagnosed with RLS. I had worked about a decade before that in neurology, epilepsy, Parkinson's, and depression. Never heard of RLS. I thought that's when you get nervous and shake your feet over a table or something like that. And when we started talking to patients, it was just completely, it blew my mind away. I've never seen a patient population that is this motivated, recognizes that this is a problem, and wants to get help.
Yeah.
You don't see this in sleep apnea. I mean, most commonly, patients that come over to get an overnight sleep study are there because their significant other sent them over. Say, well, I don't think I have sleep apnea, but my wife thinks I snore, so I'm here to get it checked out anyway. And they're in denial, and they just don't get it. But RLS, it was 180. It was, I know what I have. I want to get treated because I can't sleep.
Yep.
And physicians, what I was surprised when I was started talking to the HCPs treating RLS, very, very similar mindset of, oh, I hate to see these patients because I don't really have great options for them. And this is the only option I can give them. And I would definitely look forward to something that's different. A device or a non-drug alternative sounds reasonable to these patients. So to me, that push and the pull existed in the market. And the technology, it didn't really matter what the solution was. The unmet need was so compelling, the prevalence was so strong, that when we talked to patients about, hey, would you wear this? Would you do this? Would you get an implant? The answer was yes to everything.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't care what it is. I just want
100%.
And that
you tell me to eat lima beans, I'll eat lima beans, whatever I got to do to make it go away. Yeah. I mean, it is an unbearable state. It's actually crazy making. My wife, when we first met, couldn't understand it. And I said, let me just take you to this. I want to take you to this. It was like a chat room for people with RLS.
Yeah.
And there was a gentleman in there who said, he goes, I was in a car accident. I lost one arm. I had an entire side of my body, of my face reconstructed, on and on and on about this car accident. And he said, to this day, the worst thing that's ever happened to me is restless leg syndrome. And that,
I believe
when she read that, it put it into perspective for her. She was like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. It was crazy making for those of us that had it, because it was hard to find a physician 15, 20 years ago that would even recognize it as a disease state.
Correct. And for a lot of the patients that have been living with this for 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, half of the time just convincing people that they're not crazy. This is not something they're making up. It's been incredibly rewarding to talk to some of these folks that have now gotten on therapy, and some of these folks that are just, generally grateful that there's something out there. Someone's building or developing a therapy for it. And my wall is filled with letters that we get all the time from patients, and we learn a ton from patients. And that really was our true north, our DNA of figuring out, well, what specifically can we help with RLS? There's a number of ways you can treat it, but for us, it came down to this hallmark of RLS, which was in the urge. Okay, I have this urge to move my feet. I need to get up and walk. I need to kick my legs. And that urge seemed to be, temporarily gone when you walk, when you kick your feet. So it's almost like scratching an itch is how I've heard it described, or Coca-Cola flowing through your veins, and it's this weird urge, and then you get better when you walk, or get better when you kick your feet. So we latched onto that insight and said, hey, could we then mechanistically do the same exact thing that proprioception or movement of your legs is doing inside to the ventral horn of the spinal cord? So basically, your nerves that send a message back to the peripheral, the spinal cord, and up to the CNS, could we trick them into thinking that you're moving your feet, or your lower leg muscles are engaged? And would that, quote unquote, scratch the itch? And turns out it did. And there was instant gratification for a number of patients. We brought them into a short study. Didn't really get to actually work on any of this for the rest of the year at Stanford Biodesign, and picked this back up almost a year after, because we had another angle that we were chasing. And when we did some of these early studies, we found that this was instant gratification. We could actually, trigger that mechanism by electrically stimulating the peroneal nerve bilaterally on both legs. And then it came down to, well, are we solving something with a solution that is maybe worse than the problem? Like, you stimulate, now your legs are jumping, and you've got motor activity, and now, well, I can't sleep because of the stimulator. No, that's a different problem. So then part of that was to address the second piece, which is, well, how do we make this compatible with sleep? How do we make sure that this is not something that feels like muscle stimulator or a TENS unit that gets you to twitch your legs? And we spent a good portion of time figuring that out: waveforms, electrode configurations, optimizing the stimulation, to where we got it to patients being able to fall asleep with the stimulation. They can't feel the stimulation. So now, one, we were scratching the itch. Two, we were allowing patients to fall asleep with stimulation on. And that, to us, started ringing the bells of saying, hey, now we've got something here that I think can get to the unmet need of sleep onset insomnia. It's like, look, patients cannot fall asleep with RLS. Our focus should be 100% on how do we get them to fall asleep. Now, symptom suppression, great. That's fantastic. That's probably going to bring things down to where they could naturally fall asleep. So now we started doing that slowly in home studies. Our first pilot study, we did perhaps one of the largest randomized control trials for a device in RLS across 7 states. And we got an FDA approval based on the data that we read out from that trial. We met all 7 endpoints. And we followed those patients subsequently for 6 more months in-house. Like, it was an open label extension where we just wanted to see the effects of the therapy, what would happen longer term. And what we saw was incredibly compelling. We took patients that were having an average of 5 to 6 nights a week of RLS down to a night and a half to 2 nights, 2.5 nights at the end of 6 months. And they weren't even using, experiencing symptoms the other nights. So
those other nights, they didn't even need to turn the device on.
Right. So we tell people to not prophylactically treat RLS with a device. We tell them to use it when symptoms present. And it is quite literally instant gratification, right? So it does have a post-stimulation effect as well. We believe for 3 to 4 hours post-stimulation that you do experience this relief. So that, for most people, gets them to sleep.
Yeah.
And we tell them, hey, one of the biggest things, I come from the implantable work. So I designed tin cans and leads that went inside bodies for many years. Compliance was a given to me. It's like, well, what are you going to do? It's inside your body. So it's implant and forget was the mantra, right? Like, you don't have to worry about compliance, unlike drugs. But with a wearable, it's a totally different ballgame. It's all about compliance, right? And this is really where philosophically, maybe this is I'm skewed a different way. I don't believe in the whole gamification. Let's figure out a way to trick people to wear this thing every day. The analogy was much more simpler to me. It's like if you have back pain and Bengay helps you with your back pain, next time you have back
Put it
pain, you're
on.
gonna go find Bengay. It's just instant gratification and rewards right there, and that's what you do.
Yeah.
But if you tell them that, hey, put this device on, 6 years later, it'll prevent you from having heart failure. You may have all the data in the world. You're right, clinical trials in the world, but just people don't do that. People aren't, we're inherently wired to be. I don't have any wearables on me, right? So
Right.
I don't do it because it's just not something that um, comes naturally. So again, going back to the unmet need, I don't really have an unmet need to track every vital in my body 24 hours of the day. Now, if I had a problem and if it solved a problem for me, absolutely.
You would
I
do
mean,
it. Yeah.
I would do whatever it took. So to me, that part was compelling about the mechanism of action. And in talking to some of our early investors, that was the talk track that they
That
were
resonated.
very comfortable. Yeah, because these are folks that are traditional medtech investors and not your digital health or SaaS investors. And it takes a little bit of crossing the chasm for them to say, we've invested in implants, we've invested in therapeutics, but we haven't invested in this non-invasive world. What is this? What could this be like? There's adherence to worry about. And then there's the big gorilla in the room, which is reimbursement. How are you going to get commercial? How are you going to get paid for this? So it took the right group of investors to actually appreciate that, well, hang on a second. There's a huge unmet need here. Any which way we skin this market, it is massive. Patient impact is big, physician impact is massive.
And you probably have one of the most highly compliant patient subsets in all of medicine because all they want to do, the only thing they can think about is how can I get rid of this
Right.
problem? This isn't like
Absolutely.
a pain that comes and goes and
Yeah.
that you can still walk with. So if, to your point, yeah, if the device really works, then they will use it and they will use it religiously.
That's the key. And we get asked this all the time. It's like, oh, how do you design taking into account compliance? How do you make it usable? All that is important, but we have to be humble about the fact that I could give them a brick, and if it worked, people will still use it. It's just because of the unmet need, and we just happen to be solving an unmet need. And of course, making it comfortable to wear overnight and making it easy to use is vital. That's what our R&D team really doubles down on. But the reality is that the patient population is just desperate for a way to solve this unmet need. And if this solves it, that's what they wear.
Yeah. What did you come up with this technology? Did you design the technology on your own? Was this something that you licensed from one of the medical centers? How did you come across the technology?
No, this is 100% homegrown at Noctrix. So we started off with a hypothesis of really chasing down, hey, what about proprioception or motion is helping treat RLS? We looked at what's been done in that space before. We started off, there was basically a vibration pad that was attempted in that space, and it helped for patients that had mild RLS. But in talking to some of the physicians, the KOLs, again, these folks have been phenomenal. I've never worked with a community of key opinion leader physicians that is as engaged, as truly committed to helping patients as the RLS group. They just know each other. There's differences of opinion. They're very respectful to each other, and they're willing to put in the time. A lot of these folks, could retire and go do other things, but they're in there in the clinics. They still send emails to me with emails from their patients, which I read out to the rest of the company. And some of these patients are asking for assisted suicide because that's how bad it is for them. And they're like, look, just help me end this. And that's what drives them to work. And they've put in the time to really give us their 2 cents on, hey, look, I've seen this device come out. This was helping, maybe mild RLS patients, and it was challenging for the others. And their ask loud and clear was, give me something for these folks that have been on dopamine, they're maxed out on dopamine, they still have RLS. Like, I don't want to put them on an opioid if I don't have to. Like,
Yeah.
that population, can you move the needle in that population?
Yeah.
Because then I can totally see how it, matters for the rest of it and go up from there. So working with them on physiologically, like the insights as well, and like what worked, what didn't work, was incredibly helpful in helping outline what should our approach be. So we looked at various approaches to emulate proprioception, if you will. And we said, well, vibration was one. We looked at, tendon, vibrating the tendon at a specific frequency that would, trick your brain into thinking you're dorsiflexing.
Yep.
VR and AR and haptics, and folks have been using that for a bit. A lot of those came down to, well, it's not compliant with sleep. So if you ultimately have to treat the need of getting people to fall and stay asleep, then anything that you're doing physically is going to be challenging at best. And that's how we kind of narrowed down the
Started narrowing in on the stim. Yeah.
That's right. And wound up with where we did.
When was the product approved?
Last year in April. So we're a little over, April of 2023 was when we got our.
It's a commercially available at this point. I'm guessing you guys are probably rolling this thing out in a somewhat slow cadence to make sure that you get the results you're looking for. But for those that aren't familiar, I mean, I was on the dopamine agonist for a period of time, and it was really weird. I ended up gaining like 25 pounds. This was probably 10 years ago. My neurologist couldn't figure out why. It was stopping the restless legs, but ultimately it was my my GP, my general practitioner, who figured it out. He toiled over it for weeks, and then he called me one day and he goes, "I think I know what the answer is." He goes, "I looked on the package insert, and what was happening was I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would just binge eat. And I would like go through a tray of Oreos or a bag of Doritos, and I would be thinking in my head, I'm not even hungry right now, and I'm still eating."
Right.
On the package insert on those dopamine agonists, it says it can cause compulsive gambling. And interestingly enough, for me, it was playing out differently. It was playing out in compulsive eating. And so then so it is, and to your point, they're Parkinson's drugs. So it is just, it's as, they've got as much good as they do, they have as much side effects. So it is an incredible option to have this, especially for those patients that, don't respond to medications and don't want to go on an opiate or something like that. What's the mechanism? What's the mechanism of action in the device? Do you have a device there that you can show?
So I've got, this is one of our device kits. I believe this is a non-functional unit. The team does not trust me with functional units on my desk, but this is what gets shipped to the patient. It's packaged in a box. It's very consumer medical device-ish. The device itself consists of these two bands. They're fabric bands with electronics are all embedded inside. There's a battery, there's a current circuit board, there's some flexible electronics that go out to the stimulation pads. The stimulation pads themselves are basically, two stainless steel rivets.
Yep.
And you attach this electrode onto it. The electrode is basically a hydrogel coated stimulation electrode.
Yep.
And you remove the release liner, it gets sticky. These wind up needing to be replaced on a weekly basis. So we give patients a supply in sort of a consumable form, like a monthly kit. You replace these pads once a week, basically, and the device gets wrapped around your leg, right on the outside of your knee. So the peroneal nerve is, if you feel the outside of your knee, there's a little bone that you'll see on the outside. The peroneal nerve runs right around that It's about 1.5 centimeters, maybe 2 centimeters at most below the skin. Fairly easy to access transcutaneously. So we've designed the electrodes, the sizing, the spacing, and we've got little markers on the band itself that helps patients position.
Yeah.
We train them. Each of these devices is personalized to the patient. So once the patient gets it, we bring them into the clinic. We typically partner with sleep clinics across the country that, very akin to like a CPAP setup, like a fitting.
Yep.
The stimulation settings need to be tuned just for you. So what we're trying to do, getting to the mechanism of action, is we're afferently stimulating the peroneal nerve. So it sends a signal up to the ventral horn of the spinal cord. And we need to know that we're doing this. So usually when you hit it afferently, you should see a response efferently back. In our case, that efferent response winds up being measurable as a sustained increase in tonic activity on the lower leg muscles, the anterior tibialis muscle. So we put a little EMG signal on there. We put a little EMG signal on there, pick up an EMG signal, the tonic signal that starts going up. So the muscle tone basically starts increasing. That, that's typically what we're looking at trigger, is to say, we know we're now stimulating, we're getting a response. Great, patient's in a good spot. Now we want to tune those settings to make sure that they're able to fall asleep with it. It's not too loud, it's not too weak. And then once patients go home, they have, buttons on this that could go from level 1 to 5. They could, go plus or minus 20% from the programmed therapeutic values. So these values wind up getting programmed in at that initial titration session. It's a bilateral stimulation device. So you have 2 bands, one for each leg.
How long does it take for, like, if I were to put that on, well, I guess I wouldn't put it on until I experience symptoms, but if I experience symptoms and then you put it on, how long does it take for it to take effect?
Yeah, so most patients experience relief in, about 15, 20 minutes in.
Wow.
You should see a reduction in symptoms. All we say is don't wait for your symptoms to get really bad before you get on the therapy. Put it on early. When symptoms present. For a lot of patients that start with treatment for us, they have symptoms 6 nights a week, maybe 7 nights a week. So for them, it's just habit. They put it on right before they go to bed. And that's really when they turn on the therapy. Today, it turns on and stimulates for about 30 minutes. That's one dose of what you get. And, a lot of these patients are able to fall asleep because there's also the effects carry over past that 30 minutes. And for patients that do wake up sometimes to go to the bathroom at night, come back to bed and back to square one, or they may have breakthrough symptoms at night, they turn it on again. So we tell them, again, you can use it as many times as you want and just, hit the button again, it'll give you another dose. And we're also working on automating some of those as well in future generations of the device where it's totally closed loop. Today, patients take off the device in the morning and you plug it in to recharge it. Batteries get recharged, so you're ready to use it again the following night. That said, some of our patients also use it during the day.
Yeah.
If you want to take a nap in the afternoon, go on a long airplane ride. This isn't something that makes you drowsy, so you're able to use it whenever you need to. And that then messes with your charging pattern and when do you decide to recharge it and all that. So they figured out kind of what works for them. And that differs from patient to patient. Largely, if you look at the median use case, it is for a person that's trying to fall asleep. So they try to put it on right before they go to bed. Yeah. And they're trying to help fall asleep and stay asleep.
Yeah, it's such a wild disease because I'll get it if I don't take my medication. I will get it every night, without fail.
Yeah.
And but it is interesting in that once you do get to sleep, oftentimes you don't get the breakthrough. You don't get the breakthrough symptoms all that much. If I take my medication too early sometimes, and then and then halfway through the night, sometimes I'll wake up with breakthrough symptoms. Sometimes I won't. But it's it's just that initial getting to sleep that is the hardest part. yeah, a closed loop system would be an absolute game changer. Like that, if you and interestingly enough, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but I actually, if I get it really bad, I'll get it in my arms as well, which
Yeah.
is,
So from what I have heard from the physicians that we work with, and honestly, from whom we've learned tons, it is a classic sign of what they call augmentation of the
yeah,
disease, in that it may not be the disease itself, it's the dopamine. So the dopamine actually causes the disease to wind up getting augmented, if you will. Augmentation sometimes is defined as the disease starting earlier. So maybe symptoms used to start at 8 o'clock for you before, and now it's 6 and it's 5. And we've treated patients that have symptoms all day long, like
yeah,
literally all day long. And those are the hardest to treat of all of the patients. Even for the physicians that are treating them, they wind up having to very delicately back them off of the dopamine and get them on something like low dose methadone, because it can be torturous for
yeah,
the patient because you've got symptoms all day. And for some patients, that migrates over to like the upper arms or back. We've heard some of these scenarios as well. And from what the physicians tell us, it's largely in part due to augmentation of,
yep,
and this is why several of the guidelines and the standards are considering moving dopamine off. Is while it helps with these RLS symptoms, it takes more and more dopamine over time,
right,
and that winds up presenting some side effects and maybe even effects that wind up being challenging to manage in this patient population. But again, it's
that's incredible.
kudos to all the treating physicians here, because they've been the ones, to your point, just like your GP had to kind of go through and figure out what's going on. They've been the ones at the forefront of this, trying to problem solve and figure out, like, hey, this is the arsenal that we have. We just have dopamine and we have gabapentinoid.
Right.
What do we do to fix this problem, and how do we manage some of these side effects that we're getting?
Yeah. You guys are well positioned moving forward. Um, I want to be conscientious of time and get you out of here on time, but last question for you. Have you guys thought of looking at any of the other neurological diseases with this mechanism of action? Any other potential indications that you're looking at?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a lot of times, again, this goes back to the unmet need philosophy that we take here at Noctrix, of more, let's find the unmet need and then hammer it. Let's not walk around with a hammer and find the nail. Um, we have aspirations even in over and beyond. We're treating drug refractory severe RLS today, so that's a subset of a subset of a subset. About 25 million people that have RLS in the U.S. About 8 million that are on medications potentially for RLS and have it at least severe enough to be on meds. About 1.5 to 2 million of them that are on meds still have symptoms 5-6 nights a week. They have it severe. That's where we're throwing the dart today. We do want to expand out and aspire to be sort of the standard of care of managing all RLS. When you think of sleep apnea, you think of CPAPs. That sort of is the gold standard. We believe TOMAC, or tonic motor activation therapy, which is what we're developing, can have that potential to become the standard of care for treating RLS. Like, that should be what patients wind up getting. That's what we aspire to. We have looked at mechanistically, there are certain niche pockets that we think are interesting, and we filed IP, and we're internally kind of spending the time to understand if there truly is an unmet need, if those stakeholder alignment issues exist, patient, physician, payer. But the heavy focus for us is executing on the market opportunity that we have today in RLS. You mentioned the launch. We got an approval in April of 23. October, around September, we launched what's in what we call a controlled release in limited states in the US. And to date, it's honestly been one of the most challenging things to manage, is manage expectations. We're a very small team. We were about 30 people until 2 weeks ago, and we're about 44 people today. We're spooling up inventory. We're also making sure that we have the infrastructure in place to support patients, to onboard patients, do this personalization of the titration. We're registered as a DME. We directly, ship the device to the patient. We bill the patient's insurance. We work directly with the payers to ensure that this is covered. That's very important to us. We go payer by payer by payer, make sure that the payer is actually covering this therapy. The patient out of pocket is as low as we possibly can make it be. We take a lot of that work off of the physician's office in terms of prior authorizations, appeals, in any way that we're able to assist in a compliant manner, we do. That's our primary focus. We want to make sure that we really understand the support infrastructure it needs to successfully scale the businesses and do this, rinse and repeat it in geography. So we're very picky. We're opening it state by state by state. There's a number of licensing rules with DME, and we need to be licensed in the state to be able to distribute it. So we're being selective. We pick a state. We really want to go deep, open up prescribers. We've got, I highly encourage people to check out our website for more information. We certainly have all of that in there. It's just nidrarls.com. It's NIDRA RLS.com, where you can learn more about the therapy, where we're available, or even perhaps speaking to your physician about it. But over the next 12 months, we do expect to be rolling this out more nationally. And as we get our own dedicated code, our payment coverage starts to open up, that really, we believe, will be that rocket fuel that helps us propel this forward to more practices across the nation.
Yeah. Unfortunately, here in the United States, reimbursement is everything. It's, you can have the best technology in the world, but if you don't, if the payers aren't going to pay for it, then it's going to be an uphill slog. But I am very confident that you guys will get a code for this. I mean, it's like I said, it's such an unmet need, and the feedback I've gotten from folks that have tried it, it's been pretty significantly positive. So, thanks again for coming on the show, joining me today. Really appreciate it. Thank you again for what you're doing for the community. Really excited to watch this company continue to grow. You guys were able to capture a significant chunk of cash in a capital raise. I think it was around 40 million at the end of last year, which was probably the height of the worst funding market I've ever seen in 25 years in this business. And I know Joe Mullings would concur. So I think that speaks volumes to the validity of the therapy and the space and whatnot. And just wishing you continued success, my friend.
Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciated the conversation, and it's an honor to do the job that I get to do every day. And like you said, we're fortunate to have the right investors with the right mindset around the table that have also been aligned 100% with what we just discussed today. So really enjoyed the discussion, and I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you for doing this.
You got it. That's it for this edition of The Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. We'll catch you on the next episode.